The story of the Zodiac Killer begins on a quiet December night in 1968, when two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, were attacked while parked along Lake Herman Road near Benicia, California. What initially appeared to be a random roadside crime would become the opening chapter of one of America's most enduring criminal mysteries. Faraday and Jensen had been spending time together when another vehicle approached. At some point, the attacker confronted the couple. Faraday was shot at close range, while Jensen attempted to escape on foot and was shot multiple times. Both died. There was little immediately available to investigators that could identify their killer. For months, the case remained an unsolved double murder. Then, in July 1969, another young couple encountered the killer. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Meja were sitting inside Ferrin's car in a parking area at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. Another vehicle pulled up beside them and then apparently drove away. Moments later, it returned. The attacker approached the car and fired several shots into it. Ferrin was fatally wounded. Meja survived despite being seriously injured. The attack might have remained another unexplained shooting, were it not for what happened next. The killer telephoned the Vallejo Police Department and claimed responsibility for both the Blue Rock Springs attack and the earlier Lake Herman Road murders. He provided details about the crimes that convinced investigators he was not simply seeking attention after reading about them in the newspapers. But the killer wanted something more than recognition. He wanted the entire public to know that he was watching. Soon, newspapers in the San Francisco Bay Area began receiving letters from someone calling himself the Zodiac. The letters were deliberately provocative. The writer claimed responsibility for the murders and threatened to continue killing unless newspapers published his messages. He also sent a series of strange symbols that he said contained a secret message about his identity. Zodiac had transformed an ordinary murder investigation into a terrifying public spectacle. One of the most famous messages was divided among 3 newspapers. The resulting 408-symbol cryptogram was known as the Zodiac cipher. The killer claimed that the cipher contained a message explaining who he was and what he intended to do. 2 civilians, Donald and Betty Harden, eventually solved it, but the solution did not reveal the killer's name. Instead, the message contained a disturbing mixture of boasts, references to death, and the killer's apparent fascination with the idea of victims becoming his servants in an imagined afterlife. And then came another attack. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were at Lake Berryessa when a strange man wearing a dark hood approached them. The hood carried a distinctive symbol, a cross inside a circle, the symbol that would become synonymous with the Zodiac. The man claimed he was an escaped prisoner and demanded their money and car keys. But instead of simply robbing them, he produced a knife and restrained the couple. Hartnell and Shepard were tied together. The attacker then stabbed them repeatedly before leaving the scene. Despite the brutality of the attack, Hartnell survived. Shepard was critically injured and later died from her wounds. What made the crime particularly chilling was that the attacker did not simply disappear. Before leaving, he wrote on Hartnell's car door, apparently recording the dates of the previous attacks and identifying himself with the Zodiac symbol. The message suggested that the killer was deliberately documenting his own crimes. Only days later, the Zodiac struck again. This time, his target was a San Francisco cab driver named Paul Stine. On October 11, 1969, Stine picked up a passenger in San Francisco. The passenger directed him to a location in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Once the cab stopped, the passenger shot Stine in the head. Stine died at the scene. The killer then took part of Stine's shirt and left. This murder became one of the most frustrating moments in the investigation because the police came remarkably close to catching him. Witnesses saw the killer leaving the cab. Police officers were dispatched to the area, but because of a miscommunication in the police radio description, officers were reportedly given an incorrect description suggesting the suspect was a black male rather than a white male. 2 officers encountered a man who matched the corrected description, but based on the information they had received, did not realize they were looking at the murder suspect. The man walked away. That man was never conclusively identified. Later, the Zodiac sent another letter to a newspaper and enclosed a piece of Paul Stine's blood-stained shirt as evidence that he was responsible for the murder. He was no longer simply claiming responsibility. He was demonstrating that he could kill and disappear. The Zodiac letters became increasingly threatening. He taunted police officers, mocked investigators, and demanded that newspapers continue publishing his communications. He also claimed responsibility for crimes that authorities could not independently connect to him. This created one of the central problems of the case: how much of what the Zodiac said was actually true. Investigators could confirm his involvement in several attacks because he provided information that had not been publicly released, but other claims were impossible to verify. The Zodiac also claimed to have killed many more people than the 5 officially attributed to him. Whether those claims were genuine or simply an attempt to create a larger legend remains uncertain. The killer's correspondence eventually produced another famous cryptogram, known as the Zodiac 340 cipher, because it contained 340 symbols. For decades, amateur codebreakers, professional cryptographers, investigators, and enthusiasts attempted to decipher it. It resisted every serious attempt. The mystery became bigger than the original crimes. The Zodiac was no longer simply an unidentified murderer. He had become a cultural obsession. People studied his handwriting, his symbols, his letters, his clothing descriptions, his communications, and his possible motives. Investigators developed numerous suspects. Among the most famous was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo area man who attracted significant suspicion. Investigators examined evidence connecting him to various elements of the case, but no investigation ultimately produced sufficient evidence to establish that Allen was the Zodiac Killer. Other suspects were proposed over the years. Some were investigated seriously. Others emerged through speculation, books, documentaries, and independent researchers. But none was conclusively identified as the murderer. And that was the fundamental problem facing investigators. The Zodiac had created an investigation in which almost everything was uncertain. The authorities knew that 5 people had been murdered and 2 others had survived attempted killings. They had letters, fingerprints, handwriting samples, eyewitness accounts, and other evidence. But there was no definitive piece of evidence that connected all of those clues to a single identifiable person. The killer had also exploited the media. Every time newspapers published his letters, his influence grew. Every threat created another wave of fear. Every cryptogram gave the public another mystery to solve. He appeared to understand that his greatest weapon was not simply violence. It was uncertainty. Eventually, the confirmed attacks stopped. The letters became less frequent. Then they stopped as well, and the Zodiac disappeared. No confirmed Zodiac killing has been established since 1969. But the investigation never truly ended. Decades passed, and the case continued to attract investigators and codebreakers. Then, in December 2020, a major breakthrough occurred. A team of codebreakers, David Orenchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck, announced that they had solved the Zodiac's 340 symbol cipher. The FBI subsequently confirmed that the solution had been authenticated. Yet the breakthrough produced another twist. The cipher did not reveal the Zodiac's name. Instead, it contained another bizarre message in which the killer discussed the idea of being caught and referenced the television program The Most Dangerous Game. It reinforced the impression that the writer was fascinated by pursuit, death, and the prospect of being hunted. But the central mystery remained untouched. Who was the Zodiac Killer? The murders had occurred more than half a century earlier, yet the killer's identity remained officially unknown. The case presents an extraordinary challenge because the murderer appeared to understand the limitations of the investigation. He attacked in different locations, used different methods, communicated through the press, and deliberately created confusion about his identity. At Lake Herman Road, 2 teenagers were killed by gunfire. At Blue Rock Springs, another couple was attacked, leaving 1 person dead and another wounded. At Lake Berryessa, the attacker changed his method, using a knife against 2 victims. In San Francisco, Paul Stine was shot inside his taxi. And after each attack, the killer seemed to become more confident. The 2 survivors, Michael Majow and Brian Hartnell, provided investigators with valuable accounts of their attackers. Yet neither account ultimately led authorities to a definitive identification. The witnesses who saw the killer near Paul Stine's cab also provided crucial information, but the police radio error meant officers who might have encountered the suspect did not know they were looking for him. That moment became one of the great "what-if" episodes in American criminal history. What if the officers had received the correct description? What if the Zodiac had been stopped that night? What if one of his letters had contained enough information to identify him? What if the 340 cipher had been solved in 1969 instead of 2020? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what happened to the Zodiac after he disappeared? Did he die? Was he imprisoned for another crime? Did he simply stop killing? Did he move somewhere else and live an ordinary life? Or did investigators encounter him without realizing who he was? There is no definitive answer. That uncertainty is what has kept the Zodiac case alive for generations. The Zodiac Killer did not become famous because he committed the largest number of murders in American history. He became infamous because he turned his crimes into a calculated mystery. He killed, then wrote. He threatened, then vanished. He challenged police, then watched the public attempt to decipher his messages. And ultimately, he left behind a case filled with evidence, but without the one piece investigators wanted most, his identity. More than 5 decades after the last confirmed Zodiac attack, the murders remain officially unsolved.